Welcome back for episode 4 of Strange, Creepy and Mysterious Things I Found on the Internet, a series where I cover a range of unsettling internet media. If you haven't seen the first 3 episodes, I'll leave links to those in the description. If you enjoy internet mysteries, conspiracies and true crime, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. I also have a Patreon and a PayPal, so if you're interested in supporting the channel, feel free to check those out, links will be in the description. You can watch an uncut version of this video on my Patreon, which features more disturbing clips, images and details, and a whole extra mystery. Uncut videos are ad-free and available to all patrons at any tier. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice website has a whole section on death row information. I guess other states have their own sites like this too, I just happened to come across the Texas one. It's all very morbid, but you could spend hours browsing on here. There are pages listing all the inmates currently on death row, executed inmates, statistics throughout the years, the history of death row, inmates who are no longer on death row, and more. Let's take a look at some of the pages on this website, starting with inmates currently on death row. All of the inmates I clicked on are murderers, some of whom had multiple victims. Some of these inmates have appealed their convictions, and I'm sure out of all of them, there's a chance 1 or 2 maybe were wrongfully convicted or sentenced too harshly, but the vast majority are right where they belong. Take Joseph Francois, who in 2010 broke into the home of an ex-girlfriend he was stalking, murdered her teenage daughter and niece with a then set the house on fire. When he was sentenced to death, he cursed and shouted at the victims' mothers, saying he didn't have to listen to the victim impact statements. This was one of several times where he was sent out of the court for acting inappropriately through the trial. This man clearly had no remorse for what he did, and while it's the most violent of his known crimes, it wasn't the first. He had been in prison in 1992, 1993 and 1998 for possession of a controlled substance, and in 2006 for burglary of a habitat and retaliation. I do think it's possible for even some murderers to rehabilitate and genuinely see the error of their ways. Whether or not they should be given another chance at life is a whole other debate. But it surprises me how people in these situations even have the nerve to appeal the sentences. Joseph violently took 2 lives, totally disrespected the victims' mothers in court, and yet he doesn't believe he deserves the punishment he got. Travis Mullis views his conviction differently, and in 2018 requested that his legal counsel be dismissed and all previous mental health evaluations be ignored, with hopes that his execution would be fast-tracked. He was convicted in 2011 of abducting and murdering his 3-month-old son in 2008. In 2012, he wrote, "There has never been any question of innocence in this case. It is in the best interest of justice for the victim and the victim's family for this appeal to stop and execution of the sentence to be carried out in a timely manner." I bet it's also in his best interest. I doubt he cares too much about the victim or the victim's family, especially after seeing him so nonchalantly describe what he did, even with a smirk on his face. As Travis said, there's no question of innocence in this case, so the chance of him ever living a free life is minuscule. Even if the death sentence got overturned, he'd spend the rest of his life in prison or in a psychiatric hospital, and he's currently just waiting to die, so I'm guessing he just wants to speed up the process and get it over and done with. There's also a list of inmates who are no longer on death row, many of whom had their sentence reduced for one reason or another. Some died of natural causes, and others took their own lives before they could be executed, or after their sentence was reduced, presumably because they didn't want to spend decades in prison. That covers most reasons for the inmates no longer being on death row, but there are a couple of exceptions, such as Edward King, who was murdered by another inmate, and Ovid Douglas, who was killed after attempting to escape from Jefferson County while on bench warrant. There are countless stories here that you could spend days researching. The most interesting page on this website, in my opinion, is inmates' last words before they got executed. It's morbidly fascinating to know what went through these people's heads moments before they died, whether they regretted their crimes or didn't seem too bothered. Many of them seem to have accepted their fate and thanked the prison guards and apologised to the victims' families, such as 55-year-old Anthony Shaw, a serial killer and child molester. I'd like to take a moment to say I'm sorry. No amount of words could ever undo what I've done. To the family of my victims, I wish I could undo that past. It is what it is. God bless all of you. I will die with a clear conscience. I made my peace. There is no others. I would like to wish a happy birthday to Barbara Carroll. Today is her birthday. I would like to especially thank those that have helped me. You know who you are. God bless everybody until we meet again. I'm ready, Warden. I'm not really sure how you could die with a clear conscience after committing such heinous crimes, but I do hope that the victims' families took some level of comfort in that. I imagine whatever comfort they might take would be extremely limited, but at least they know that he's not just apologising to try and get himself off the hook. Some of the most unsettling last words are from people who don't appear to have any remorse over what they've done, and if anything think they're the victim because they're being executed. Terry Edwards was convicted on 2 charges of murder after an armed robbery at his place of work, which he'd been sacked from the month before for stealing money. His last words were simply, "Yes, I made peace with God. I hope you'll make peace with this." Larry Swearingen kidnapped and murdered a 19-year-old girl in 1998. He was executed after spending 19 years on death row, and his last words were, "Lord forgive them, they don't know what they are doing." Both of those statements give me the creeps. They seem to imply that the inmates don't believe that they deserved the punishment they got. The morality of capital punishment is a complex debate, but I can't imagine murdering one or multiple people, being sentenced to death and feeling like I'm the victim. A few days ago, Reddit user AnnieCakes22 posted on the Reddit Bureau of Investigation after becoming concerned about her neighbour. The post read, "Okay, so I'm not sure if this is the correct subreddit for this, but basically one of my neighbours in my apartment complex has changed. When we first moved, he was the only neighbour to say hi in passing. He always commented on me and my boyfriend's band shirts, and on New Year's we had a long conversation about cars and stuff. I think he may have been autistic and living with other autistic people. Sorry if that sounded rude, not trying to. He gave us this long list of fun nicknames for him. He was always in a good mood. He would skateboard around the parking lot and sing Motley Crue songs. Well, a few months ago, out of nowhere, he starts acting completely different just after winter break. Like, scary different. One day we asked him if he listened to any new bands recently, and this is what he said. No, I don't listen to that stuff anymore. It's for the devil. I worship Jesus now." And he walks away. Me and my boyfriend look at each other like, what? Ever since then, the only words I hear him say is scripture out of the Bible. He is constantly, and I mean constantly, reading it out loud. The other week I was walking towards the building and I happened to look up to his balcony and he opens the door and starts saying strange prayers to me. The only part I really remember was he ended with something like, "You'll be okay as long as you follow Jesus." Then, the other day, I was talking past their door and I could hear this very loud voice, on TV I'm guessing, talking about cults, while multiple people, including him, were shouting scripture. As in, they were all reading different scripture very loud. Then today I walked by and heard this, and I don't even know what to make of it. I recorded a small bit because I didn't want them to see me. I'm just concerned for him because he was really nice to us. He had so much personality, and now it's like he's been brainwashed. Does this seem extremely fishy to anyone else, or should I just mind my own business? Oh, I'm located in very southern Illinois, if that helps. Annie provided a link to the video mentioned in the post. I struggled to make out much from that video. I made out something along the lines of how you're supposed to protect you, then something about a post-war mega-alliance, and then something about invading China. The audio was identified in the comments though as a Bill Wirtz remix video.
So if you live outside the palace, how are you supposed to protect your from Jesus? Hire a post-war mega alliance. The League of Jesus. Everyone started hiring Jesus.
Some commenters pointed out that it might not be too strange. If Annie is right and the neighbour is autistic, maybe that explains him listening to this stuff on repeat. There are other signs that something is off with him though, how he not only suddenly lost interest in the music he liked before, but literally said it was for the devil. Annie says in a comment that his personality is gone, and now he only talks about Jesus in a sad or scared tone. These are huge red flags, and I think she's right to be concerned. My first thought is that maybe the neighbour is experiencing sudden symptoms of schizophrenia or another similar mental illness. It's not uncommon, in fact it's a bit of a cliche in movies and TV shows for people to suddenly become very religious or to become very interested in cult-related activity in the midst of a manic episode or psychosis. I wasn't the only one to wonder this, as the top comment reads, "My aunt, who was over 30 when she had her first child, started to act really odd and reading and posting things that seemed like cult propaganda to my family and me. It went as far as her going to conventions and giving them almost all of her money. She also had a weird obsession with Jesus and believed that Jews were evil, just very odd beliefs and behaviour. Turns out she had developed schizophrenia and started having her first episodes that were triggered by the difficult birth she went through. But that's the thing with schizophrenia, it can develop when you're 20 or 30 and a person can change overnight sometimes. I hope this is not what happened to your neighbour, but that might be an explanation." Assuming the neighbour's new personality is due to mental illness, it's really sad that it seems to have just completely changed him. I guess Annie could request a wellness check on him, but beyond that, I'm not really sure if there's anything that she could do, seeing as she's not family and we don't even know if he has a family. It's entirely possible that his change of personality is solely as a result of mental illness and that he became interested in religion off his own back. Another more worrying possibility though is that the people who live with him have indoctrinated him into some kind of cult or religion. How long he has lived with them or how well he knows them isn't specified in the post, but maybe when he moved in they were already interested in that stuff and just gradually roped him in. Or if they've all lived together for a long time, maybe one person got interested in this stuff and then slowly managed to convert everyone else. This could have coincided with a sudden breakdown for the neighbour, which could have made him more susceptible to radicalisation. This is just speculation though, as nothing is known about the people he lives with other than Annie's assumption that they may also be autistic. Whatever is going on here, I really hope the neighbour can get the help he needs. On the 13th of November 1985, the Nevado del Ruiz volcano, located in Colombia, erupted at around 9 p.m. More than 25,000 people were killed when massive landslides and mud flows caused by volcanic debris mixing with ice rushed into the villages, destroying them. 13-year-old Omayra Sanchez Garzon's home was demolished, and her father and aunt were killed instantly. What happened to Amira was so much worse though. Her legs were trapped between the debris of the house and it was impossible to get her out. Rescue workers tried to free her, but each time it only resulted in the water level rising. As anyone would be in that situation, Amira was scared and she sometimes cried and prayed, but overall her courage amazed everyone. Rescue workers, journalists and other people who had survived the volcano gathered round Omayra trying to comfort her. She sung to them, allowed them to interview her, and at one point even told them to go home and rest. At one point, rescue workers returned with a pump and tried to free her yet again, but they discovered that her legs were bent around under concrete as if she was kneeling, so it would have been impossible to get her out without breaking or amputating her legs. Well, it would have been possible if they had the right equipment. Had they chosen to do this, Amira likely would have died anyway, because they lacked the medical equipment to care for her after an amputation, so doctors decided that the most humane thing to do was to just let her die. She was stuck in the water for a total of roughly 60 hours, and as her hope turned to acceptance, she physically deteriorated. Her eyes turned red, her hands turned white, and her face swelled. Shortly before her death, she began hallucinating and told people that she didn't want to be late for school. Frank Fournier, a French reporter, travelled to photograph Amira, a decision that would prove controversial. He was called a vulture, and people didn't understand how he could just stand there taking a photo of this poor girl while she slowly died. On the 16th of November, at around 10 AM, Amira died, likely due to gangrene or hypothermia. Frank's photo drew attention to the situation, which was particularly tragic, not only because a young girl suffered for so long awaiting her inevitable death, but because her death probably could have been prevented if they had the right equipment to get her out. The Colombian government was criticised for ignoring warning signs prior to the eruption, and for not dedicating enough resources to the rescue effort. We don't know Frank's intentions when he took the photo. Maybe he is a vulture. But regardless, photos like this can often be very useful in drawing attention to situations that may be controversial, and situations that maybe a lesson can be learned from. The level of suffering that Omayra experienced is unimaginable, but Frank couldn't have saved her, and neither could anyone else there without the right equipment. If the photo he took played any role in measures being put in place to prevent something like this ever happening again, then that arguably outweighs any criticism of the photo. Disney has been accused on multiple occasions of featuring references and images that may be inappropriate for children in their movies and TV shows. In most cases, it could be argued that whatever happened wasn't intentional, or that it was taken the wrong way. Even if it seems pretty obviously intentional, they can still argue plausible deniability in most cases. For example, in The Lion King, there's a scene where Simba collapses and a cloud of dust goes into the air, which appears to spell out the word. The special effects team claimed it was actually supposed to say SFX, even though that looks way more like an E than an F. Then there was part of a tower on the Little Mermaid cover, which looked rather phallic. It was rumoured that it had been deliberately drawn by a disgruntled Disney artist after he was told his employment would be terminated. In actuality, the artist wasn't even a Disney employee and hadn't been sacked. He claims the phallic object was a total accident and a result of rushing through it in the early hours of the morning. He said he didn't even realise, and neither did anyone else for about a year after the film's release. However, there's one appropriate scene that can't be chalked up to an accident: the photo of a topless woman in The Rescuers. On the 8th of January 1999, Disney announced a recall of around 3.4 million copies of the home video version of the movie because it contained a, quote, objectionable background image. The image appeared in 2 non-consecutive frames and were not normally noticeable when watching the film unless you knew about them and paused it at exactly the right time. So there's actually a bit of a conspiracy theory surrounding why Disney decided to recall these copies of the movie at that time, when those frames had been in it since the original theatrical release in 1977, over 20 years prior, and knowledge of the scenes wasn't widespread. The Rescuers was released on VHS in 1992 and released again as part of the Walt Disney Masterpiece Collection on the 5th of January 1999. The recall was announced 3 days later, and some people believe it might have been a publicity stunt to make those copies more in demand and to generally boost sales. Some people even believe that Disney was aware of these scenes all along and that they actually authorised the release of the film with these scenes, with hopes that more people would hear about it and therefore more people would buy it, but that's just a theory. The origin of the photo is unknown and the woman's identity remains a mystery. Her face isn't very clear in the photo, but all this time later you'd think by now someone would have recognised her, considering her nude was literally in a Disney movie. I'd be willing to bet money that there are some people who have spent a considerable amount of time trying to identify her. This is the internet after all. Many people are aware of these frames, and yet no one has been able to locate the original image. HuffPost spoke to Tom Cito, a former Disney animator, who said, "If someone had asked an artist, he would say, oh yeah, there's a naked picture in there. I mean, the Playboy centerfold. Everyone knows that. Everyone who was in animation knew about the centerfold, but nobody asked us." His belief that the woman was a Playboy centerfold might have just been an educated guess, but it's an unlikely possibility. If that was the case, she more than likely would have been identified by now. A more plausible theory is that this woman posed for some photos for a much smaller publication and wasn't aware one of them had made its way into this film, or at least not until Disney announced the recall. Assuming she found out, if she was even still alive at that point, it makes sense that she might no longer want to be associated with those photos. That could have been her claim to fame, even if only for 5 minutes, but yet she has never come forward and identified herself, which does make it seem like she doesn't want to be identified. As for who may have slipped these photos in, I think we all know it must have been Tyler Durden. But seriously, that's also a mystery. Disney claimed that their animators weren't responsible, and that the photo must have been inserted during the post-production process, which seems to contradict what Tom says. I'm not sure how Disney would even know whether or not it was one of the animators though, considering these frames aren't visible during a normal viewing of the movie. Whoever checked the film over after it had been produced may well have missed the frames. One theory that would vaguely answer all these questions, without naming any names, is that the photo was inserted during the post-production process, but that it was a screenshot from a totally different movie, probably from a scene that was cut. Scenes are filmed for pretty much every movie that don't end up making the final cut for one reason or another. Perhaps the photo was from a scene that was cut from a movie to avoid an R rating. Some people involved in the post-production process might have access to a library of various different scenes that have been cut from other movies, and that could explain the origin of this photo. I think that probably is the most plausible theory, but I wonder if we'll ever find out for sure. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any things you've found on the internet that you'd like me to include in the next episode. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my patrons, whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next Thursday in a new video.